this is such a wonky angle. I've just realised that. I'm so sorry. Welcome to Dead Good Book Reviews on this slightly grey Sunday morning. Forgive me for the overhead lighting. I'm Judith, and today I'm bringing you a review of Yoon Lee's Phoenix Extravagant. That's the kind of title that feels like it needs a... I absolutely loved this dragon new fantasy sci-fi-esque wonderful book, and I wanted to talk to you about it. Disclaimer segment. I was sent a free copy of this book for review from the publisher via NetGalley. All opinions are my own. Nobody's paying me to talk about books. As ever, if you would like to pay me to talk about books, I'm available. Second disclaimer, obviously I'm a white cis lady, so I can't comment on various aspects of this book from an Own Voices perspective. Please do seek out Own Voices reviews. I'm just here to lift the book into your knowledge points. That was a sentence. Basically just bear that in mind when taking my opinion into account. And finally, this review is going to be spoiler-free. If anything even remotely looks like a spoiler, I will put a spoiler skip, but in my experience, I haven't talked about spoilers in these reviews. So who is Yoon Lee? Yoon Lee is a Korean-American science fiction and fantasy writer who's written a whole host of things, including the Locus Award-winning Nine Fox Gambit, which I really ought to read at some point. Looking at his website, it seems he's also written a bunch of interactive fiction and some RPGs, which sounds like it could be really good fun. Sidebar. I am so glad I'm putting this author research segment into my reviews because I find it really interesting and really fun, and you're going to see how I find research fun in this review as we go on. Phoenix Extravagant is a new standalone fantasy book, is how it's being marketed. It's got some sci-fi elements, but it does have fantasy in it. This is coming out from Solaris, who are an Oxford-based publisher run by Rebellion Publishing, if you know them. It was originally going to be published in June of this year, but they've actually moved it to October, although I think that, or slash I know, that the Goldsboro shiny editions have already gone out, so if you see anyone wafting a copy, that is why. I should say, I never know if I need to disclaim this or not, my wife works for Rebellion, the company that owns Solaris, but that hasn't impacted my review at all, and she's in a completely different part of it. I just think it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to potential biases. Maybe that was a fourth disclaimer. I apologise for not including it in our disclaimer segment. Jebby, our non-binary protagonist, wants to be an artist but ends up getting a job painting the symbols that bring the occupying military's automata to life. After discovering some unsavoury information about how things are being handled, Jebby decides to abscond with their enormous dragon automata. This is set in a fictional Korea during the Japanese occupation / Japanese rule of Korea. I'm not sure what the right language around that is. It's a period I don't know very much about because English-centred education, thanks so much. But a quick, very, very brief set of research that I have done suggests this was between 1910 and 1945. I don't know a huge amount about that period. I'm going to do some more research at some point because I found it really interesting. First of the things I really enjoyed was Jebby as a character. I think part of why Jebby really worked for me as a character was because Yoon Lee has written a world where it seemed to me gender and sexuality just don't matter, it's not important. So to compare that to something like Mask of Shadows by Lindsay, and I have a limited amount of books I've read with a non-binary protagonist, so excuse me for comparing two very different books, but in that at least some of the book, not a lot of it, but some of it is Sal justifying their identity to other people. In this case that wasn't ever part of the narrative. And I think that lack of tension allows Jebby to flourish beyond that identity and do other things and be a fully rounded human being in this world. I also feel like this book is one giant screw you to everyone who says we can't have a singular they pronoun in fiction, because I was never confused. The book flows wonderfully. It's not difficult. But anyway, Jebby, I thought that they managed to be simultaneously very sad and thoughtful and quite lonely at times, and they have a realistic amount of stress about the situations that are happening to them, but there's also a certain casualness that seeps throughout the whole book. The tone is simultaneously very dark and very casual, and that shouldn't work in both a book or a character. It just shouldn't be able to mismatch, but it really works, it does. There are a whole host of other fabulous side characters and antagonists and wonderful stuff happening, but I just wanted to focus in on Jebby because I think they are a very, very good character. Long-time viewers of this channel will know that I love a dragon, and this dragon is no exception. Oh, it's so good. It's going straight into my top dragons list, a video I might film one day. I'm not going to spoil anything because I think the dragon is a little bit important to discover for yourself, but Lee's website describes the dragon as a mecha... what is it? Pacifist Mecha-Dragon, and if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. This is one of those books that hooks a lot of bigger questions onto the main narrative, and a lot of that comes into play when considering the dragon. So free will, consciousness, what is something that's alive. They're all thoughts that you have while reading, but what I liked is that the book never shoves them in your face and never says, you know, this is the theme, are you understanding my theme? It feels very much more like a good story that happens to be bringing up these issues, which is how I prefer to have those things. I think there's value to more explicit analogies, but this was some good stuff. The magic system, you know, I couldn't not mention the magic system. I actually can't get into this too much because spoilers, but you'll just have to trust me that this book has a cool magic system. I mean, you already know about the fact that you have to paint stuff onto these automata to bring them to life, but there's a lot more beyond that that's actually really plot important. It's both cool and also kind of devastating, but most of all it's really, really good and really well written. Rest assured this is going in a magic systems video at some point, I don't know when. I want to talk a little bit about the cultural destruction kind of theme of this book, because I think it's really important. As I said at the beginning, I don't know a huge amount about Korea under Japanese rule, but this book has prompted me to make a change on that and do some research into it. And this is the bare minimum, scratching the surface, Wikipedia article level of research, so take all of this with a pinch of salt. As I understand it, a huge part of this Japanese involvement in Korea was the removal of Korean culture, and they had policies towards education, newspaper censorship, what else is in my notes? The Korean language, anthropology, and so much more. And there's a general sense of the Japanese culture was thought of by them as superior, so they should be doing it that way rather than doing it the Korean way. Again, this is Wikipedia research, but according to the South Korean government, there are 75,311 cultural artifacts that were taken from Korea. Not very many of them have been given back. I can't spoil it for you, it would be just abominable, but there's a huge amount of importance given to those cultural artifacts and fantasy spin on what might have happened to them. And that, alongside this research and this background context and the historical context of that, makes it so much more horrible. This is one of those books where it just is one of my favourite things about science fiction and fantasy, where you read a book, you love a book, you look into it, you realise that this is based in something historical, and you just go, how had I never seen that before? How have I never come across this? History is so big. I'm such a history nerd. And I just love the way that science fiction and fantasy can reframe history and bring it to the forefront of thinking. It's just, it's good stuff. It's one of the main reasons I think I love science fiction and fantasy, because I don't like historical fiction, but I really like going down a research rabbit hole after reading some actual fantasy. Now we're on to that complicated what didn't I like / what would I have changed to make it better, but obviously I can't change a book and I wouldn't change a book. You know how it is. I think one of the big things I would have tweaked was either the balance of the plot or the way this book has been marketed. It's marketed very much as the Jebi steals a dragon automata and they run away to be a revolution, and actually a lot more of the book is spent on the before. There's a lot of setup to them getting the job, and there's a lot of build up to the escape, and actually I'd say it's probably 2/3 of the book is set up. It certainly felt that way anyway. It's a very, very short book, and I think either the book needed to be longer and lean more on that second half and have more fun dragon riding, because that's the fantasy we all want. I say we all, me. Or it needed the marketing being done slightly differently. Like, I understand it's much more exciting to say non-binary protagonist steals a dragon, so maybe it's expectation versus reality, but that was a jarring thing for me, I suppose. I didn't like it too much. So the book just ends up feeling a little bit imbalanced. The ending comes very abruptly, and I think just a little bit of reweighting of things. Some comparisons for you if you want to read similar things, if you have. I thought of a few things. This is not an exhaustive list. I've just finished the Poppy War trilogy, so that's at the forefront of my mind, but that does some interesting stuff with the idea of one culture thinking it's better than another, especially in book 2 and 3, and also dealing with historical events that you may not already know about in a fantasy setting. I thought that might be a good one. It's an obvious one, but there you go. I've only read the first one of these. I can't remember what the series is called, but the book is called The Black Tides of Heaven by J.Y. Yang, and I know this has some exploration of gender, so everyone is brought up kind of without gender until they choose one. So that might be an interesting one if you're looking for fantasy that explores gender identity. And then the third one is, again, it's just a recent read that kind of popped into my mind, and again it's playing on that one culture dominating another. Tiger at Midnight by Swati Tidal. I have it behind me. I can't grab it, but I will put the cover up on screen. Sorry, editing me. If you're looking for a kind of romance-heavy plot, that would be an option. Again, not an exhaustive list, and please do leave more recommendations in the comments below. Final thoughts. I absolutely love this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars overall, and I think on a reread it might be bumped up to 5. What this has proved for me is how much I really like having context around a book, knowing about an author, knowing about what context they're writing in, what if they're writing based on a historical event, all of that stuff. Basically everything I've talked about in this review that I found out after I read the book. If I'd done it alongside, maybe, I don't know. It's interesting, and it adds more to my theory that reading a book is not just based on a book, it's about all of the experience you're having around that, what kind of time of year it is, what your day's been like that day, all of that stuff. It's so important. Basically, this has opened a whole rabbit hole of research for me, and I'm excited to go down it. But if you're thinking, oh no, this book's going to be a really boring history nerd book, it's not. That's just my lovely personal addition to it. I think this is just an exceptional story that is hung on this framework, or rather the historical framework's hung on the story. I don't know which way you want to look at it, but it's just a wonderful story with a great cast of characters, with some awesome representation. It's good stuff. Do I think you should read this? Yes, absolutely. I think you would have a wonderful time. Thank you so much for watching. I've blithered away here. I haven't quite had coffee yet this morning, so everything's a bit of a mess, so I'm hoping I've edited this into something exceptional, or at least passable. Do comment below if you've read this, what your thoughts were, or if you've read anything similar that you'd like to recommend. Let's have a chat in the comments below. I'd love that. You can also follow me on all of my social media. You can like and subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.